Dr. Mick Connors, welcome to PedChat.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
So what did you want to be growing up?
I actually wanted to be a professional football player for the Miami Dolphins. That was back in the day when they were good.
Mm-hmm.
Don Shula was the coach, and
Offensive lineman,
that was
defensive
my
lineman.
dream.
What was your...
Running back, fullback.
Oh, running back.
Yeah.
Well, because
So
you're
I
a big
played-
guy, I thought maybe.
Yeah, that's what I played in grade school, high school, fullback. So that was always the dream. But other things, too many injuries in high school and banging your head against the wall didn't seem like a fun thing to do after a while.
So from football to medicine, how did you find medicine?
Really, I found medicine first. I actually was the seventh of 8 kids. So my mom had 8 kids in 10 years, and my brother actually, my oldest brother passed away before I was born. And so I kind of grew up listening to her stories about medicine and about his treatment and having cancer and all the things that he went through. So that was always an interest of mine, was pediatrics, or being able to handle the difficult case, or the help out the child in pain or having suffering or those kind of things. So that was always an interest as well growing up.
What you went into being a pediatric ER doc, and from what I learned from you just at lunch a few minutes ago, is that it's a newer profession. It was first started in the 90s, so you were kind of one of the first waves of doctors going into this profession.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, it was really interesting. In medical school, you get exposures to various things, and I certainly was attracted to pediatrics. I think my aspiration initially was to go into oncology, but I think I shared with you as well. I did a 4th-year medical school rotation, and the first patient I saw was terminal Wilms. So I was like, okay, I can't do this. I'm going to do something else. And I actually had...
And that was the same disease. It's a cancer that your brother had, right?
Yeah, the same cancer that my brother had. So
that's wild.
The first day of my pediatric oncology rotation, I felt like I was looking at my parents and my brother and like, this is too close to home. I can't do this. So there was a couple things that happened. One is I had, in medical school, I also had exposure to a pediatric emergency physician, which I didn't even know existed. And at that time, he was the first fellow. It was in the early 90s, and it was 1993 when emergency medicine had its first fellowship board certification. So it was like a brand new field, very exciting, lots of different things going on with it. And the other ironic thing that happened during my residency is being a pediatrician, they check you if you had chickenpox. That was pre-vaccine. So I had never had chickenpox, even though all my siblings had. I already assumed I had. So every time I got exposed to chickenpox in the hospital, they pulled me off the inpatient wards, and where'd they put me? They put me in the emergency department. So I probably did more emergency medicine rotations than any pediatric resident, forever. It took me till my 2nd year to actually get chickenpox. So
You finally got it.
I finally got it.
So that pulled you into the ER more.
Yeah.
What did you like about it? Why did you continue?
I think it was the thing that I really liked about it is that immediate ability or learning to handle that critical situation right away. One is the physiologic side of how do you manage medicine, but for me, I've always been intrigued by the parental side of it. Like how do you gain trust very quickly with a family? How do you interact with them? How do you make them feel comfortable or at least understand? I mean, I think, not coming from a medical family or really a medical background, I think that was the thing that kind of attracted me the most, was just being able to handle patients and families, and probably that crisis situation when you have to sit down and talk to a family about a bad outcome or their sick child or things like that. I felt like I could really make a big difference in that way.
Yeah, whereas a general pediatrician can build rapport with a patient potentially over an 18-year period, right?
Right.
You had to do it in minutes.
Yeah, you have
Not
to
to
do it
mention in minutes, but also their child has something pretty serious, right?
Right. Oftentimes, yeah, certainly a lot of times they do, or a lot of times they think that they do, right? A lot of what we do in pediatrics, and especially in pediatric emergency medicine, is reassurance. So, hey, it's okay. Your child's okay. Mm-hmm. I mean, all your concerns are, I appreciate your concern, but hey, I'm just happy to tell you that he looks great. There's really nothing wrong or nothing that we need to do. It's a whole lot more difficult conversation. Like, no, he doesn't look so great. We got to do things. But either way, you kind of approach both things differently. And the irony in pediatrics, and probably the challenge, which I think you have to embrace, because you don't know how any patient or family member is going to react. I'll give you an anecdote. For example, I'm in a busy emergency department. early in my career, and I've got 2 patients, and I'm running around. One kid has a broken arm, he fell and has a little buckle fracture in his arm. And the other kid, I've gotten his labs back, and I'm really concerned that he has leukemia, right? So I'm like, okay, I'll knock out that broken arm first. That'll be easy. So I walk into that, and I'm like, hey, Mom, just want to let you know that his arm is broken. Oh, she goes crazy and gets upset. And I got to call my husband. I'm like, no. Here's the X-ray. Doesn't need to be set. Oh my gosh, this is like the worst thing it's ever. It would, in my perception, it was like the least minor thing in the world, and I really hadn't, had any clue. And then I walked into the other room, and I'm like, okay, I really got to prepare myself and say, ma'am, I just want to let you know that I'm a little concerned about his labs and his exam, and I think, there's other testing we need to do. And she's like, okay, doctor. What's the worst case scenario? I said, well, I'm concerned that your child might have leukemia. And she said, okay, what do we do next?
Wow.
And it was like that moment in my career, I was like, holy moly, you just don't know, and everybody reacts differently. And so I think for me, my demeanor has always been one more of the laid back, less anxious, frantic kind of care, and more just trying to maintain that sense of, a demeanor of, whether it's confidence or reassurance or something to say it's going to be okay and that we can take care of it and you're in the right place. So I think the ER really presents you with those unique challenges that you don't get anywhere else.
How did you go from the ER to your being an entrepreneur essentially for the first time, which was your pediatric sedation company, right?
Yeah. So that was, so I was doing a lot of things in emergency medicine. I loved child advocacy. I was working in injury prevention, working on emergency medical services for children, and loved all that. But we were also getting more and more kids that needed sedation routinely in the ER. Like the neurologist would call and say, hey, we need to sedate a child for a spinal tap. In my training, I did a lot of suture moonlighting in the emergency department, which, we picked out the size of the papoose board and we pinned the kid down, strap him down, and sew him up as quick as we could. And the other thing that happened is the hospital, was in 2004, got their first MRI machine and they couldn't get kids to lie still. So, we just really had this idea. There was a group out of Atlanta that had kind of done some of the similar things, and we took a look at what they did and decided to start a pediatric sedation service with the idea that we could help kids get through procedures, have a small group that could do it well, and be able to meet the needs for MRI and for the other medical specialists that were there as well for these procedures that they needed. The void that was there is that we needed to get kids' procedures done, but where, the really alternative was either they got what we call in medicine brutane, meaning we pinned them down or wrapped them up in that boost board to quickly get it done, or they had general anesthesia. And there wasn't really anything in the middle, or it was very limited in the middle. So, most people didn't have access. So by creating a service that was dedicated to what each patient needed and also assisting the medical staff, we could sedate a kid and more safely and efficiently do a procedure than they could do it by pinning them down with 5 people in their office. And we could do it a whole lot more efficiently and less expensive and for a lot less time than taking them to the operating room. So we were able to kind of fill that void in there, that continuum. People, there's a lot of middle ground in sedation from being wide awake to being totally out.
Right.
And we were just trying to find that, we found that middle ground. And
Fascinating.
So it was so much better for patients, families, the providers, and for the hospital, and it really was fantastic.
Yeah. Why did you sold that company in 2012?
Yeah. So
why did you part ways with that company?
Yeah, I had a weak moment, and I decided I wanted to get out of the business world and go be a doctor. Because I was, it's difficult. I mean, we were really trying to serve all customers, all kids, and do what was right for them. But there is that part of you like, gosh, do I go down the business road? I've done all this training, or do I, head more towards, being a doctor again? And I think it was just timed right. I got a call from Connecticut Children's in Hartford, Connecticut, and they wanted me to come up and do some pain medicine, learn pain medicine, and help them further their sedation service. And so for a variety of reasons, we went to Hartford, moved my kids. I had 4 kids. I had 3 of them still in school, 1 in college, 1 in senior in high school, and 2 in middle school. And we decided to make the leap and go to, what they promised was I'd just not worry about money, go take care of kids, help them set up a sedation service. They were really focused on collaboration with all the different groups and the fact that we really wanted to be patient-centered. And it was all about what each patient needed. So we took the lead.
Yeah, so you moved to Connecticut, you realized you didn't like the Northeast,
Yep.
and then you moved back to
Yeah.
Knoxville, Tennessee.
Yeah, so
because
we
your
just-
family was
Yeah.
sad and missed home, missed friends. And after you moved back, you started practicing full time again, correct?
Yeah, so I really felt like, so we, for a variety of reasons, primarily family reasons, we needed to get back to Tennessee. And so we moved my kids back, and then, decided that this was the only place I could bring them back to as opposed to going somewhere else. And so I left Connecticut Children's, and their sedation service has taken off, which is great. Everybody laughs at me because I get something going and then I leave it. I do all the heavy lifting, and then they're reaping the rewards, but that's great. But yeah, so I came back, and after having been out of the emergency department for 8 years, I went back to pediatric emergency medicine. And it was really quite an interesting one to be out of the ER for a while and then to come back. And there's so many things that haven't changed. But I think the primary thing that I saw that changed was, just how many more kids we were seeing in the emergency department and where the kids were coming from, which really kind of intrigued me because, 8-10 years ago, most of the kids we would get referred to the ER were coming from pediatric offices or been seen by the pediatrician or those kind of things. And more I kept hearing, I've been to the urgent care, I've been to the retail clinic, or I've been referred, or I've been to all three tonight, you're my third stop, or, things like that. And you just saw a different mix of care. And then, I don't know, I guess I'm more sensitive to the fact that the underserved population really, I recognize now that they're not there because they want to be there or because, this is a fun place to hang out, or, oftentimes we're like, gosh, why are you here? You can get very frustrated, but, they really don't have access to, pediatric care after hours, especially. And so we see a big influx after hours of folks that just don't have access to care. My classic recent anecdote was a mom who had been seen here locally in our emergency department 27 times, or her child, her 2.5-year-old, had been seen 27 times, and he's 2.5. And so your initial reaction is like, holy cow, that she's abusing the ER, she's using this primary
that would be I would jump.
She shouldn't be here, and then you sit down and have a conversation, right? And I was in the midst of kind of contemplating this telemedicine thing and whatnot, and I said, I'm just curious, you've been seeing, he's been seen a lot here in the emergency department. That's probably a big difference too, because the electronic medical record we actually tell, whereas before it was more difficult. But I said, can I help you get connected with a pediatrician, or what's going on? He has no chronic disease. And she said, well, here's my challenge. I have a minimum wage job. I work Monday through Friday during business hours, and I go to a community health center. So if I leave my job, I lose the income, the little that I have, or I might get fired. And there's really nowhere else for me to go after hours than to come to the emergency department. And to me, that was very enlightening. And that was as an entrepreneur, as a child advocate, as talking to someone who prides themselves in how do we get kids access to better care. It's like, this is crazy. She just doesn't have access. It's not because she wants to be there, or she's abusing it, or she's using it as primary care because she's oversleeping, right? All the different things that we all jump to conclusions about is she was worried about her kid, right? He comes in with a cold or a fever, and she needs to stay at work, or she needs a note for work. She really doesn't have a whole lot of other places to go. And I think that's the challenge with our healthcare system. So again, it fosters my desire to figure out a way to provide all kids access, especially to great care, pediatric care. I think, I'm a pediatrician, so I can be biased, right? I think every kiddo, especially a sick kiddo, should see their pediatrician or see a pediatrician who's been trained for 3 to 6 years just in pediatric care.
So you realized, I should say your entrepreneurial access to better care mission, it sounds like your light bulb went off after talking to this one patient, or a light bulb in your head went off, I should say.
Yeah.
And is that what pushed you to start your new company?
Yeah, I think there's a combination. One is, again, seeing the number of kids that don't connect with their pediatrician after hours. They're going to retail clinics, urgent cares, talking to a lot of pediatricians who are challenged with their kids after hours. And being a pediatric ER doc, we see certainly the kids that should have come in earlier but didn't reach out or access something, and we see a large number of kids and parents that are just concerned and need some kind of advice after hours. So all those kind of things I think tied together, along with, my desire to, really put something together that was more comprehensive, that would cover, I hear there's a lot of concerns on the pediatrician side, there's a lot of concerns on the patient side, and it's just how can we innovate and put those things together? Because I really think, having done some population health when I was in Connecticut, and clinical integration is, the big talk now is healthcare costs. So how do we not only innovate, but how do we lower healthcare costs? And the only studies that I really know that have shown a decrease in healthcare costs is when a patient connects with their medical home, their primary care provider. And I think over the last 10 years, we've kind of lost sight of that. And I think pediatricians especially have lost sight of that. One of the great things I've been able to do with this foray into telemedicine is work with Dr. Barton Schmidt, who did all the telephone, or still does, all the telephone pediatric guidelines for telephone triage. So when you call after hours, you go through his protocols. And his studies show that 10 years ago, 90% of pediatricians took phone calls from the nurse in the after hours, and now that's less than 10%.
Wow.
So what's happened is the pediatricians have kind of pulled back from engaging with their families after hours for a lot of good reasons and a lot of challenges, and lifestyle and lack of reimbursement, and being overwhelmed and working harder and getting paid less. But what you've seen is then people again going back to fill that void that's left, right? So you see the rise in retail clinics and urgent cares and emergency departments that these kids go to. And now I was really amazed when I started looking at things 18 months ago with the direct-to-consumer telemedicine movement, with the big companies that are offering direct-to-consumer telemedicine, which honestly, the way I really got into this was thinking I would be one of those docs. I would just sign on and, I'm hanging out on my couch, my wife's working, my kids are at school, hey, I can make some extra income from, my screened-in porch.
Yeah.
But the pediatrician in me couldn't pull the trigger. I feel somewhat part of the problem in the emergency department, fragmenting or disrupting care from the medical home. And I just felt like I couldn't do this. This didn't make good sense to me to add to the fragmentation. I really thought there's gotta be a way that we can bring people back together. Why create a whole nother workforce when we have a whole workforce of pediatricians across the country if we could just engage them and figure out a way to get them re-engaged after hours, whether it's getting them more connected, easy connection, getting some reimbursement, some ways that there's got to be a way that we can kind of get them reconnected, as opposed to, again, we have a physician shortage. It just seems like, I don't know, the business models and the way that it, provided for the patient, and then just going on and not knowing who you're going to see or what their training is or where they're at. Many of these companies license their docs in 30 or 40 states, so you don't know where they're at, you don't know what their training is, you don't know who they are. And so I don't know, it just all kind of, with the clinical scenarios I'm seeing in the emergency department come down, and then the solutions that are being offered, I just didn't feel like they were matching up, or that we could do better.
Did you research it sounds like you were at a point where, okay, I'll just sign on to be a part of another telemedicine platform essentially, and I'll sit in my screening porch, as you said, and see if I get some calls. When you started searching for the telemedicine company, you realized that there just wasn't anything there. Was it not that because there's a telemedicine company not built for pediatricians, or was it something more than that?
Yeah, I think my primary goal was to find something that already existed.
Right.
I did not want to start another company. Yeah. I was like, I'm sure my wife would tell you, I wish you would have found something that already existed. Because,
yeah, my wife tells me that too.
It's like, there's just got to be out there. I mean, in medicine, there's, what we call workarounds, and we see that all the time, especially in hospital medicine, where we don't really want to fix the problem, we're just going to go around the problem, right? And unfortunately, or not, it's kind of like sedation. It's easy to, we'll just pin them down, or we'll just do this over here, and we're not worried about safety or monitoring or that kind of stuff. It'll be quicker and easier. We'll just do it. It'll be, don't worry about it. As opposed to just saying, here's the problem, let's address the problem. And for me, good, bad, or otherwise, I see a problem, I want to address the problem. And to me, the offerings that were out there were workarounds. So they're like, well, we can't really engage the pediatrician, that's a lot of work. We want the big institutions, we'll get them on board, we'll outsource to this guy, and it'll all be done quick and we can get there. So unfortunately, I took the path of, fortunately or unfortunately, I was like, there's got to be something, there's a way to work for the patients and the families and get them connected back to the medical home. And I really thought that, it would be out there, I would find it, or along this path over the last 18 months, somebody would kind of have it or, figure it out. But I think it's a lot of work. I think it's definitely a harder approach to what we're trying to do, but I think it's the long-term approach that we need. So there's some good short-term answers out there right now, but I think long-term, and you're a lot younger than me, but I always feel like relationships will matter, especially in pediatrics. I think the focus groups around telemedicine say that. I think the current utilization of telemedicine says a lot about that. Is
there utilization? I hear about many telemedicine companies coming out. I feel like there are a lot of them.
Yeah,
and our users actually are users. Gosh, it's a really tech term to use. Are patients engaging?
I think there's slow uptake in utilization. My bet or wager is that utilization will be driven by the relationships. If you can connect with somebody local, trusted, that either you're a pediatrician or a pediatrician that's in your community, or it works in your ER or does whatever, you'll see utilization go up quite
Makes sense.
differently. I mean, that's my bet. I'm told all the time millennials don't care, and they can just see whoever or whenever, and they like drive through. I just don't. Maybe I'm just old school, but I don't believe that, because just like I felt when I started the emergency department, or when I see someone that's seen their pediatrician has a real relationship, it means a lot to them. To be able to see someone in their community or see their own pediatrician or someone in their pediatric group, especially as a family, because most of what we're offering is not, I think what families want is that reassurance. And hey, come in tomorrow, it'll be okay. Or what's that telephone advice? Was that helpful? Or your baby has a rash, those kind of things, or high fever, and what do you need to do with them?
The company's called Anytime Pediatrics.
Yes.
And you've been getting some good press. I've read a couple of your press releases recently. It sounds like you're about to launch. You're launching in a week or something, right?
We launched.
Or was it yesterday?
Yeah, well, the irony of ironies is, from being in tech, that we wanted to launch it, 3 months ago or whatever, and then we were supposed to launch this past Monday, but we wanted to go through one more HIPAA security clearance and things like that. And you want to get everything right. You want to get at least even for the MVP or the start,
right.
You want your user interface and those kind of things to work well. So we were supposed to start Monday, and we were frustrated.
So it was like yesterday.
and so actually we're starting today.
Oh, today is the launch day?
Yeah, and the irony, and I was really frustrated until I realized that today is my mother's 85th birthday.
Oh, awesome. So you're launching on your mom's.
So yeah, the main influence in me going into medicine, like here I am, like, oh, we gotta wait till Thursday. Let's do Wednesday, and then all of a sudden I look. Oh
There's that destiny thing.
It's like it's April 19th. Wait a minute, my mom turns 85 today, and she's the main influence.
And she's still with us?
Yes, awesome. Yeah, she lives in Hilton Head, and it's just, it's a destiny thing. Like, okay, it's another sign that, keep working 20 hours a day, keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
There's light at the end of the tunnel kind of thing. But yeah, it was completely, I don't know, say randomly ironic, but it is. It's we launched this afternoon, with 29 pediatricians in Memphis, and so our initial foray is what we've done is taken the telephone triage guidelines, and we've tagged them for telemedicine, because one of the concerns is families like, I don't know if I need telemedicine, like, is this going to be helpful? So what we've done is tag those guidelines. So if the triage nurse identify, hey, the baby's got a fever and a rash, yesterday they would have said, well, go to the urgent care, go to the ER. Today they'll say, well, this might be helpful to have a telemedicine visit, you could go to Anytime Pediatrics, and they can see you online and help you determine whether you need to be seen or not be seen, or write a prescription if it's needed, or get reassurance.
So the triage nurses are selling. It sounds like they're
so we've partnered with a large telephone triage center that's out of Knoxville that does about 20,000 calls a month.
Oh wow!
And interestingly, 80% of those calls are pediatrics. So what happens is on the pediatric level is a parent's concerned, they call the pediatric office, it gets routed to the call center, the nurses go through the protocols, and then they're told, 60-70% of the time they say, yeah, take 2 Tylenol and call Dr. Smith in the morning. But the other 30% of the time it's, gosh, you need to be seen now or in the next 4 hours or within 12 hours. So what we've done is try to get those after hours, So before the child takes off to the retail clinic or the urgent care, are there things that we can do with a video visit that would be helpful to the families? And I think, again, there's a lot of hesitation on the pediatric side, but as a pediatric ER doc, what I tell folks is 90% of what my job is that first visualization of the child, right? Sick, not sick, alert, awake, breathing, not breathing, circulation, pale, those kind of things. So there's so much that you can see visually, even if you don't have the peripheral devices. So it was really a good exercise for me to go through Dr. Schmidt's protocols, because he and I worked together and were able to tag so many of those things that would now be referred, where, a fever and my neck hurts. Can't see that online. Does this cut need stitches? Does that burn need any care? Is the child really dehydrated? And is that rash itchy, scratchy, bumpy, red? Where's it at? As opposed to getting a video image of that child, we really feel like we can reduce ED visits, get the kid connected with their pediatrician, do that kind of thing.
In a broad sense, where do you see pediatrics headed?
Anytime pediatrics or pediatrics in general?
Pediatrics in general, yeah.
I think it's challenged right now. I think pediatricians are recognizing that they need to be more innovative and creative. Otherwise, they're going to get lost to, everybody's seeking convenient, low-cost care, and then unfortunately, they think about the pediatric expertise last. And so I think pediatricians are going to have to move to being more accessible and more convenient, and really build on, I think the main advantage we have as pediatricians, especially primary care pediatricians have, is that relationship. So I think we have to recreate how we approach our patients when they come into the office. Do they see the same person every time? Or am I creating a relationship with them every time? After hours, am I accessible for them? Because if we lose relationships, then it's a drive-through at McDonald's, right? I don't know who I'm going to see at my office, so I might as well go somewhere because I don't know who I'm going to see there. And it's very hard for the lay public to understand the difference of training between what they're seeing in one place versus the other. And so that's the other reason we've kind of focused on pediatrics I've been asked, well, why don't you hire this person or that person? I said, well, I want everybody to see a pediatrician. I see the value in a pediatrician, and I think pediatricians have to see the value in seeing a pediatrician. So I think we have to kind of get back to that mindset and that focus on relationships and the expertise that we bring. I mean, it's 3 years of pediatric training, or in my case, 6 years of pediatric training is a lot, but also that experience of seeing kids and nothing but kids all year long. When you have a sick kid, it adds a lot more than is really tangible, or I can give you an outcome measure for, in my opinion. And we see that. I had a kiddo that went to an urgent care and was diagnosed with RSV, which is a horrible virus. Can give you really bad, lung disease, respiratory distress, all kinds of things. And they walked in the urgent care and they did a swab for RSV, and they told the family, drop everything, run to the emergency department, come see the pediatric ER doc. And I walk in and the kiddo's coloring and playing and has no symptoms other than a runny nose. and I thought Dad was white as a sheet. I thought I was going to have to resuscitate him, and Mom, I'm like, she's fine. Because RSV can just be a simple cold. Right. And so if you're just going by the diagnosis, hey, I've got RSV, then you don't really have an understanding of what you're looking for, and whether that diagnosis is even going to change what you do. What you have to do is look at the patient and say, hey, yes, they're sick, they're not sick, are they in respiratory distress? Is there anything I need to do with this? And so it just shows the lack of experience and training and those kind of things that pediatricians really can offer if patients and families kind of recognize that, and pediatricians can continue to offer that value that I think sometimes we undervalue ourselves.
What books would you recommend for the audience?
Around telemedicine or pediatric care?
Any books.
It
doesn't have to necessarily be healthcare related.
Yeah, well, I think what came to the top of my mind, and the irony of this is that when my kids were born, I was a pediatric resident, second-year resident when my oldest daughter was born.
Oh, wow.
And
that's a hectic time to have a kid.
Well, it's a hectic time, but you're a pediatric resident, so you got to know how to raise a kid, right?
Right.
You're learning all this. But the first book that was given to me was called Your Child's Health, and it was written by a Dr. Barton Schmidt from Colorado. Huh. And it was a book about this thick. My pediatrician said, you got to have this. And so after 28 years, as part of Anytime Pediatrics, I got to meet or talk to Dr. Barton Schmidt, collaborate with him, and the first thing I told him is, you don't understand. You raised my children, because it teaches you everything from how to get your kid to sleep at night, what to do with this toilet, all the things that they don't teach doctors. We learn the medicine side of things,
Right.
but his book is just was phenomenal for us. It even has minor first aid and those kind of things. But I remember that book was worn out from one kid to the next to the next. So as a pediatrician, I would say, and I still give that book out to folks.
Mick, this has been a pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being a part of PedChat. I know the audience will get a lot out of this. And I'm looking forward to seeing where Anytime goes.
Yeah, you and me and
Yeah.
a lot of